Why was she standing in the middle of the hangar, while everyone else refused to look at her? The floodlights cut through the Colorado night like interrogation lamps. Hard, white, merciless. They exposed every scuff in the concrete, every breath in the cold air, and the lone woman at the center of the floor. Alexis stood barefoot. Her boots lay 6 feet away. Her jacket was gone. Her wrists were bound in front of her, fingers trembling slightly, not from fear, but from exhaustion. The soldiers around her kept their rifles lowered, but none of them would meet her eyes. It wasn't protocol that made them look away. It was discomfort. Because moments earlier, they had ordered her to remove everything that could hide weapons. And she had done it without hesitation. Not defiantly. Not dramatically. Just quietly. The silence that followed had been heavier than gunfire. Alexis didn't lower her head. She kept her chin level, eyes steady, breathing slow, like someone who had already survived worse. Colonel Nathaniel Hartley entered the hangar and felt something twist in his chest that had nothing to do with duty. This wasn't how infiltrators usually looked. They were frantic, sweaty, defensive, angry. This woman looked calm, almost resigned, as if she had already accepted whatever was coming. Hartley stopped a few feet from her. "Name," he said. She didn't answer immediately. She glanced at the boots on the floor, the scuffed toes, the worn laces, and then slowly raised her eyes to his. Alexis Blackwood. The name landed wrong in his ears. Not unfamiliar. Not new. Just misplaced. He nodded once. "Why did you breach Fort Carson at 2:30 in the morning?" She inhaled. Exhaled. "Because I needed to be seen." That answer unsettled him more than any threat could have. They escorted her into the holding facility, concrete walls, fluorescent lights, metal chairs. A place designed to make people feel smaller than they already were. Alexis sat down without being told. Hands folded. Back straight. They cataloged her belongings. A folded map. A single USB drive. And an old photograph. Hartley froze when he saw it. 7 soldiers. A desert background. 1998 stamped on the bottom. And there he was. Third from the left. Younger. Sharper. Wearing insignia that technically didn't exist. Project Sentinel. "Where did you get this?" he asked quietly. "My father," she replied. The room felt smaller. Then a female soldier conducting the secondary search paused. "Sir, there's something on her neck." A mark. A tattoo no bigger than a coin. A hawk in flight. And beneath it, microscopic numbers. PS047. Hartley felt the air leave his lungs. That code should not exist. That tattoo should not exist. The program that used it had been buried, classified, dismantled, erased. And yet here it was. On the body of a woman who had walked onto his base, as if she expected to be captured. He dismissed the room. Sat down in front of her. "Your ID says Emma Collins." She tilted her head. "That's the name on my paperwork." "And your real name?" Her eyes didn't blink. "Alexis Blackwood." His jaw tightened. "You're listed as KIA." "A file says I am," she replied softly. "There's a difference." He leaned back slowly. If she was telling the truth, someone had lied. If she was lying, she was the most composed liar he had ever met. "Why are you here?" Her hands clenched together. "Because 7 years ago, someone betrayed my team in Damascus." The word hit him like a bruise. Operation Nightfall. She nodded. "We were sent to destroy a chemical facility, The building was empty. The enemy was waiting. Her voice barely wavered. 6 of my teammates died in 4 minutes. Hartley swallowed. And you? I played dead. Silence. I crawled out after they left. Her eyes darkened. And I found proof that someone sold us out. His pulse thudded in his ears. You think this was intentional? I know it was. Who? She lifted her eyes. Director Cornelius Vaughn. Hartley stiffened. The man who had trained him. The man who had mentored him. The man whose name was carved into the intelligence community like scripture. You're accusing a living legend, Hartley said. I'm accusing a murderer, Alexis replied. She leaned forward slightly. He killed my father, he killed my team, and he's been doing it for decades. Hartley didn't speak, because his phone began to vibrate in his pocket. Incoming secure call. Langley. From Vaughn's office. Alexis watched his expression change. They know I'm here, she said softly. And they're not going to arrest me. She met his eyes. They're going to erase us. Hartley realized then. This wasn't an interrogation. It was a countdown. And the truth had just walked into his base barefoot. And refused to die quietly. Sometimes dignity doesn't shout. It simply stands, even when everything is taken away. Why did Colonel Hartley hesitate with his hand, still resting on the secure phone? Even though every rule he had ever lived by told him to answer it. The vibration felt heavier than it should have. Like the phone itself knew what that call meant. Alexis sat motionless across the table, wrists still bound, bare feet pressed against the cold concrete. Her eyes weren't on the phone. They were on him, watching, waiting, as if she had already accepted what would happen next and he hadn't. Hartley finally lifted the phone to his ear. Hartley, he said. The voice on the other end was smooth, controlled, familiar. Nathaniel, I hear you've picked up something unusual tonight. Director Cornelius Vaughn. The mentor. The architect. The man who had shaped Hartley's entire career. Yes, sir, Hartley replied carefully. A female intruder claims affiliation with a decommissioned program. A pause. Is she cooperative? Hartley glanced at Alexis. She gave the faintest nod, not permission, but acknowledgement. She's calm, he said, too calm. Another pause. We'll take custody, Vaughn replied. I'll dispatch a federal recovery team, keep her secured. The call ended. No threats. No raised voices. Just certainty. Hartley slowly lowered the phone. They're coming, he said. Alexis closed her eyes for a brief moment. How long, she asked. 18 hours, Hartley replied. She nodded once. That's more than I expected. He studied her face, the faint scar near her eyebrow, the quiet fatigue beneath her eyes. She didn't look like someone who had come to start a war. She looked like someone who had already survived one. Why come here, he asked. Why me? Because you trained my father, she replied. You promised him that Sentinel protected its own. The name hit him like an echo from a sealed vault in his memory. Major Daniel Blackwood. A man with steady hands and tired eyes. A communications genius who believed systems could be fixed if good people stayed inside them. They told me he died in friendly fire, Hartley said. They lied, Alexis replied. He was going to testify. 3 days before he could, he was reassigned to a firefight. Hartley exhaled slowly. You think Vaughn ordered it? I know he did. She shifted in her chair. My father left journals, encrypted, detailed. I read them when I was 16. He knew something was wrong inside Sentinel. He tried to expose it. They silenced him. Silence filled the room. Hartley finally spoke. If you're right, then what you're accusing, it's treason. Alexis gave a sad smile. Then treason has been wearing medals for 40 years. He stood and paced. You said you have proof. 40% of it, she replied. The rest is in Arlington. Why not release it? Because I wanted the whole truth, not pieces that could be buried. Her voice lowered. And because I wanted to live long enough to watch it matter. Hartley stopped packing. You realize they'll kill you to stop this. They already tried, she replied quietly, 7 years ago. The weight of her words lingered. He made his decision. I know someone, he said, Lieutenant Catherine Sullivan. If anyone can get us out without raising alarms, it's her. Alexis searched his face. You trust her? With my life. Her shoulders eased slightly. Then let's bet our lives on her. 2 hours later, Sullivan stepped into the holding room. Auburn hair pulled tight, calm eyes, a folder under her arm. Transfer papers are ready, she said. Denver Federal Holding. Alexis looked up. How long? 4 hours. Tight, Alexis murmured, but workable. Sullivan glanced between them. You're listed as KIA, she said to Alexis. Either you're a ghost or someone made a catastrophic mistake. It wasn't a mistake, Alexis replied. Sullivan didn't argue. She only said, be ready at 800. Outside, Vaughn made his calls. Short ones, quiet ones. No witnesses, make it clean. Morning came cold and clear. The convoy rolled out like any other. No sirens. No announcements. Just routine. Alexis sat cuffed in the transport van, staring at the thin metal wall. She could almost hear Damascus again, the shouting, the gunfire, the sound of bodies hitting concrete. She flexed her fingers. She was done being a ghost. 30 minutes north, the radio crackled. Security convoy, pull over. Hartley didn't slow. That's not protocol, Sullivan whispered. That's not federal, Hartley replied. That's an execution squad. Gunfire tore through the van. Alexis reacted before thought. She caught the falling guard's pistol and fired through shattered glass. The world turned into noise and metal and screaming tires. They veered off the highway into forest, into chaos. Alexis braced herself at the broken rear door, breathing through gunfire, returning precise, controlled shots that turned pursuit vehicles into burning wrecks. When the final SUV stalled in steam and smoke, silence crashed down like gravity. They had survived. Barely. Alexis stepped out of the van, blood on her sleeves, breath ragged. Hartley stared at her. You saved us. She shook her head. I endangered you by existing. 2 hours later, a private helicopter lifted them into the sky. Alexis stared out over the mountains, exhaustion finally settling into her bones. Damascus, Hartley said quietly, tell me what really happened. She didn't cry. She simply told him. Of walking into a trap. Of watching teammates fall. Of crawling out alone. And of finding emails that proved someone sold them out. 17 operations, she finished, 52 dead. Hartley's hands trembled. How much money? Over $6 billion. He closed his eyes. You're telling me my mentor is the biggest arms trafficker in modern intelligence history? Yes, Alexis replied, and we're flying straight into his shadow. She finally turned toward him. But this time, we're not walking in blind. Outside the window, America slid beneath them, quiet, unaware, while the truth raced toward daylight. And Alexis Blackwood, the woman who refused to stay dead, prepared to finish what her father had died trying to begin. Sometimes the hardest battles are fought without uniforms, without medals, and without anyone watching. but they still decide who we become. Why did the helicopter suddenly dip? As if the sky itself was trying to push them back. The cabin lights flickered once, then steadied. Alexis didn't flinch. She was already braced for turbulence that wasn't caused by weather. Barnes, the retired pilot who had answered Hartley's desperate call, corrected their altitude with a smooth pull on the controls. His face was unreadable, carved from decades of hard flights and harder landings. "Crosswinds," he said. But Sullivan was already watching her tablet, her fingers tightening around the edges. "That's not the wind," she whispered. "There's chatter on CIA frequencies. They know we're airborne." Hartley leaned forward. "How bad?" "They're deploying multiple interception teams, covering every possible landing zone between here and Virginia." Alexis exhaled slowly. "He's casting a net," she said, "not to catch us, to make sure we can't breathe." Below them, farmland slid past in long green strips, peaceful in a way that felt cruel. The country looked calm, whole, unaware that somewhere above it, a man was trying to erase the truth with military precision. Barnes glanced over his shoulder. "I've got a private strip in Tennessee. No radar, old favors, but it'll cost us time." "Time is the one thing he wants us to run out of," Hartley replied. Alexis closed her eyes for a second, feeling the exhaustion seep into her bones. Every muscle ached. Her wrists were still raw from cuffs. Her shirt was stiff with dried blood. And yet, beneath all of it, her mind was still racing. "Do it," she said. "Better to arrive late than never." The helicopter banked east. For 2 hours, no one spoke. When they landed, the air smelled like oil and pine sap. A gravel runway, a leaning hangar, a man who asked no questions and took cash like it was the only language left in the world. Refueled and airborne again, they headed for Virginia under a sky turning amber with sunset. Sullivan's tablet chirped softly. "They're concentrating around Arlington," she said. "Heavy presence. Vaughn knows where you hid it." Alexis nodded. "He helped design the vault. He knows exactly what scares him." They touched down outside the city under full darkness. No lights, no attention. A forgotten sedan waited in the shadows. Alexis slid into the driver's seat. "I mapped Cold War tunnel systems for 7 years," she said quietly. "My father helped build some of them. This bank sits on top of one." They drove through quiet streets, past families eating dinner, past kids riding bikes, past a life that felt impossibly far away from what they were carrying in their pockets. They parked 3 blocks away. Alexis led them through a dark maintenance entrance, down into a basement that smelled like damp paper and forgotten things. She spun a rusted combination lock with muscle memory that hadn't been used in years. The tunnel opened. Cold air breathed out like something alive. They moved underground, flashlights bouncing off cracked concrete walls, passing faded stencils and emergency arrows that pointed to exits no one remembered. Hartley felt like he was walking through history, through the bones of a system that had been designed to survive nuclear war and was now being used to survive corruption. Alexis stopped at a reinforced steel door. "This is it." She plugged Sullivan's tablet into the access port. Code raced across the screen. 30 seconds. A click. The door slid open. They were inside the vault level. Rows of deposit boxes gleamed faintly. Alexis went straight to box 2847. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside sat a single black external hard drive. 7 years. 52 names. $6 billion. She lifted it like something sacred. "This is justice," she whispered. The lights went out. Every emergency bulb died at once. Absolute darkness. Then the door behind them slammed. Bootsteps echoed. Flashlights flared. Voices filled the space. Vault level secured. Hartley raised his weapon. Sullivan did the same. Alexis slid the drive into her jacket and drew her pistol. And then the overhead lights came on. 10 armed men surrounded them. And standing calmly at the center of the formation was Cornelius Vaughn. Silver hair perfect, suit unwrinkled, smile effortless. "Nathaniel," he said gently, "this doesn't have to end badly." Hartley stepped forward. "It ended badly 40 years ago." Vaughn tilted his head. "You still believe in right and wrong. I always admired that about you." Alexis stared at the man who had taken her father from her. "You murdered him." Vaughn met her eyes. "I removed a threat to a very profitable system." The words felt like poison. "You sold us out in Damascus," she said. "You were never meant to survive Damascus," he replied calmly. Hartley's hands tightened around his weapon. "You're done," he said. Vaughn smiled faintly. "You don't understand. Even now, you think survival is the same as winning." Alexis took one slow step forward. "I don't need to survive," she said quietly. Vaughn frowned. She lifted her phone. "If I don't enter a specific code within 72 hours, every file I've collected is automatically decrypted and sent to 53 oversight and media organizations across the world." The room stilled. Vaughn's smile vanished. "Pull the trigger," Alexis said softly. "End your world." Silence spread like a held breath. She pressed a button. Every device in the vault lit up at once. A document appeared. The VAUGHN Network, 1985-2025. Automatic distribution in 48 hours. Weapons lowered. Men shifted uneasily. Vaughn's control cracked. He reached for his gun. Hartley fired. Vaughn collapsed to his knees. Sullivan moved fast, zip-tying his hands behind his back. "You are under arrest," she said steadily. Real federal agents flooded the vault seconds later. The nightmare ended. But for Alexis, this was only the beginning. Because when the truth finally rises, it doesn't whisper. It changes everything. Why did Alexis feel emptier after the handcuffs clicked shut around Cornelius Vaughn's wrists? Instead of relieved, she stood just beyond the ring of flashing lights and moving bodies, holding herself still while agents swarmed the vault. Radios crackled. Orders bounced through the concrete corridors. Vaughn was lifted to his feet, still bleeding from his shoulder, still watching her with a calm that no longer felt powerful, just hollow. He didn't look angry. He looked disappointed. Like she had broken something that had belonged to him. Alexis didn't celebrate. She didn't smile. She only felt tired. A deep, bone-level tired that came from carrying a truth no one wanted for too long. Hartley stepped up beside her. "It's done," he said. She nodded, but her eyes stayed on Vaughn as he was led away. "No," she replied softly, "it started." They were taken to a federal safe house before sunrise, a quiet place on the edge of the city, with clean white walls and the smell of coffee and antiseptic. Alexis showered the blood off her skin in silence. The water ran pink, then clear. She stared at her reflection, the faint scar on her eyebrow, the tattoo at the base of her neck that had nearly ended her life and nearly changed the country. She touched it gently. PS-047. A code that had once made her disposable. Now it had made her dangerous. She wrapped herself in a towel and sat on the edge of the bed, breathing slowly, trying to remember what it felt like to be normal. She couldn't. The door knocked softly. Hartley stood there. "You don't have to testify yet," he said. "You've earned rest." She shook her head. "If I rest, I'll disappear again." He studied her carefully. "You don't want to go back to being a ghost." No, she said, but I also don't know how to be visible. He nodded once. Later that morning, the news broke. Not gently, not carefully. It exploded across screens and headlines and whispers inside locked government rooms. A legendary intelligence architect arrested. Covert arms trafficking ring exposed. Dozens of classified operations reopened. Names resurfaced. Families started calling. Graves were revisited. The country didn't celebrate. It reeled. And Alexis watched it all from a quiet room with blackout curtains and a burner phone. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She answered. I found your father's voice logs, a woman said quietly. You should hear them. The woman introduced herself as Special Prosecutor Maria Chen. I want to prosecute this publicly, Chen continued, but I need your permission to use your father's files. Alexis closed her eyes. He wanted the truth out, she said, even if it broke everything. Later that night, she finally listened to her father's voice for the first time in years. Alexis, the recording said, worn and distant. If you're hearing this, then I failed to protect you. But you must understand I stayed because I believed the system could still be saved. Her throat tightened. You don't need to be brave. You just need to be honest. Tears slid down her cheeks in silence. The world outside was shifting. Inside she was unraveling. She dreamed of Damascus, of heat and dust and shouting, of hands pulling her through smoke, of voices calling her name. She woke up shaking. Sullivan sat on the edge of the bed. You're safe, she whispered. Alexis didn't answer. She didn't feel safe. She felt exposed. The next day, she was escorted into a closed-door congressional hearing. A long table. Serious faces. Familiar flags. She sat alone. And for the first time, she felt truly small. They asked questions that felt like knives. Why didn't you come forward sooner? Why should we believe you? How do we know you weren't part of it? Her voice stayed steady. I didn't survive to be convenient, she replied. Some of them flinched. Some of them leaned forward. When she finished, the room was quiet. Chen stood. We have corroborated evidence from 34 sources. This woman saved us from something we were about to become. No applause. Just silence. But it felt heavier than noise. That evening, Alexis sat alone on the safe house balcony, wrapped in a jacket that wasn't hers, watching the city lights breathe. She didn't feel victorious. She felt emptied. And strangely hopeful. Because for the first time since Damascus, the world was finally listening. But healing isn't loud. It's quiet. And slow. And it asks uncomfortable questions. And Alexis, the woman who had been trained to disappear, was finally learning how to stay. Why did Alexis almost turn around when she reached the courthouse steps? Even though she had crossed deserts, gunfire, and 7 years of silence just to stand here. The building rose in pale stone layers, calm and formal, as if nothing inside it had the power to reshape history. People passed by with coffee cups and briefcases, unaware that the woman pausing at the bottom of the stairs carried enough truth to rewrite a generation of classified decisions. She placed one bare hand against the cold railing. Her pulse felt too loud. Hartley stood a few steps behind her, not pushing, not rushing, just present. You don't owe anyone a performance, he said quietly. You only owe yourself the truth. Alexis nodded and walked inside. The courtroom smelled faintly of old paper and polished wood. The gallery filled slowly, journalists, legal aides, a few families who had been invited without being told exactly why, faces worn by years of unanswered questions. Alexis sat at the witness table. Her hands trembled, not from fear of Vaughn, from the weight of the names she carried. The judge entered. The room rose, then settled. Maria Chen stood. "Ms. Blackwood," she said, her voice steady, "why did you come forward now?" Alexis swallowed. "Because silence was killing me faster than any enemy ever could." The words surprised even her. She hadn't planned to say them. But they were true. She spoke of Damascus, of the empty building of the trap, of hearing boots approach while she lay beneath fallen teammates, of holding her breath while blood pooled across concrete. She didn't dramatize it. She didn't need to. The room leaned toward her anyway. She described her father's doubts, his journals, his fear that something inside Sentinel had grown too powerful to be honest. She described the tattoo, the code that had once marked her as expendable. And finally she said the names. One by one. 52 of them. The courtroom didn't move. Somewhere in the gallery, a woman began to cry softly. Alexis didn't look. She kept her eyes on the judge. When she finished, the room felt hollowed out. Vaughn sat behind the defense table, smaller than he had ever looked before. No cameras, no admirers, just an aging man watching the architecture of his empire collapse. He met Alexis's eyes. For the first time, he looked afraid. The verdict came days later. Guilty on all counts. Conspiracy, treason, murder by proxy, racketeering, life imprisonment. No speeches, no drama, just the quiet closing of a door that had been open too long. Afterward, Alexis stood alone outside the courthouse, the sky pale and cloudless, the city continuing like nothing had happened. Hartley joined her. "It's over," he said. She nodded, but she didn't feel finished. "What do I do now?" she asked softly. He hesitated. "You live," he said, "whatever that means to you." Weeks passed. Alexis moved into a small apartment near the river, nothing special. Clean windows, soft light, silence that didn't feel hostile. She took long walks. She learned how to sleep without waking up shaking. Some days were easier. Some days were not. One afternoon, a letter arrived. Handwritten. From a mother in Arizona. "Thank you for saying my son's name out loud." Alexis read it 3 times, then cried quietly at her kitchen table. She began to volunteer with families who had lost loved ones in classified operations. Not as a speaker, not as a symbol, just as a woman who understood what unanswered grief felt like. She never wore medals. She never corrected people who didn't know who she was. And she never erased the tattoo. It remained at the base of her neck, no longer a mark of erasure, but a reminder that survival could be quiet and still be powerful. One evening she stood on her balcony, watching the river reflect gold and blue light, breathing slowly, feeling something close to peace. She wasn't a ghost anymore. She wasn't a weapon. She was a woman learning how to belong to her own life. And for the first time since Damascus, she wasn't running. Why did Alexis hesitate before turning off the light? Even though nothing was chasing her anymore. The apartment was quiet in the gentle way that still felt unfamiliar. No radios, no alarms, no coded knocks at the door, just the low hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of water moving through the river beyond her window. She stood in the doorway of her bedroom, fingers resting on the switch, listening to her own breathing. For years, darkness had meant danger. Now it only meant rest. She turned off the light. And waited. Nothing happened. Her shoulders loosened slightly. She lay down and stared at the ceiling, letting the silence settle around her instead of against her. For the first time, she didn't feel like she had to stay awake to survive the night. She slept. Morning came gently. Sunlight slid across the floor and warmed her face, and for a moment she forgot who she had been, what she had lost, what she had carried across continents and courtrooms. Then she remembered, and instead of pain, she felt something quieter. Acceptance. She brewed coffee and stood by the window, watching joggers move along the river trail, watching people live small, ordinary lives that once felt unreachable. She had thought justice would feel loud. It didn't. It felt like breathing again. Her phone buzzed. A message from Maria Chen. The Sentinel Oversight Reform Bill had passed unanimously. New transparency protocols were in place. Independent review boards had been established. The system had changed, not perfectly but meaningfully. Alexis leaned her head against the glass. Her father had wanted this. Not revenge. Reform. She whispered a thank you to no one in particular. Later that day, she visited Arlington. Not for a ceremony. Not for cameras. Just for him. She knelt at the headstone and placed her palm against the cool marble. I stayed, she said softly, like you asked. The wind moved through the trees like a long breath. She felt lighter there, as if the earth itself was finally finished holding secrets. Months passed. Alexis took a part-time job at a small aviation museum, quiet work cataloging archives and restoring flight logs. She liked touching history that no longer had the power to hurt anyone. Children asked her questions. She answered gently. Not as a soldier. As a woman who loved the sky. Sometimes she stood beneath suspended aircraft and let the shadowed wings pass over her shoulders like something protective instead of threatening. She started painting again. Nothing dramatic. Just rivers, sunset, simple shapes. Proof that her hands were allowed to make beautiful things. One evening, Hartley visited. Older now, softer. They sat on her balcony, watching the city breathe. You saved a lot of people, he said. She shook her head. I just stopped pretending not to see. He nodded. That may be the bravest thing anyone can do. She didn't answer. Because she didn't need to. Later, after he left, she stood alone beneath the stars, feeling the cool night air on her skin, feeling present in her own body, not as armor, not as a tool, just as herself. Her phone buzzed once more. A message from a young woman she had mentored through the family's support group. Because of you, I decided not to quit. Alexis smiled softly. She typed back. I'm glad you stayed. She went inside and closed the door gently behind her. And for the first time in her life, the world felt quiet in a way that meant peace, not absence. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. And sometimes survival isn't about winning. It's about choosing to remain human, even after everything tried to take that away.